And you can't go very far without hearing someone quote him as saying something like, "I never would have been president if it hadn't been for my time in North Dakota." They're very proud of that connection there. And again, I think they do a good job of not letting it sort of overtake the natural beauty of the area, but sort of integrating it and his relationship to the area into the park in a way that works really well.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the RV Atlas. Today, we are thrilled to have back on the show Gretchen Holcomb from Boxy Colonial on the Road, and she is going to be taking us to Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. And if you're wondering if we think you should go to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, if you should add it to your national park bucket list, the answer is a resounding yes. Now, Gretchen's episode is going to focus on a review of the Medora Campground. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other options for camping around there because there are a bunch. And then she's going to take us into Theodore Roosevelt National Park and then tell us about some kind of fun and wacky and zany things that you can do in town during your visit. This is a really terrific episode. If you've ever dreamed about going to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, or if you're heading there this summer, you're going to want to make sure you listen to this one. She really covers the whole area in great detail. She was only there for 2 or 3 days, but they really packed a lot in. And the roadmap that she puts together for her trip is probably one that you might want to follow for your own trip to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So we're going to be back in a second and welcome Gretchen onto the show. But before we do so, we have a sponsored message from our friends at Camco. Hello, Gretchen Holcomb from Boxy Colonial and Boxy Colonial on the Road. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's been too long. How's the family doing?
Everybody's doing well. We've got two kids in college now, so we're down to just two at home. So that's a little weird, but all good.
And we've got an RV spring break around the corner at some point soon, hopefully.
Yeah, we're headed up to see my 19-year-old is in college in Nashville, so we're going to go see him and then do a little bit of the Natchez Trace and Birmingham, just kind of a fairly close to home trip because we're just north of Atlanta. But
And we have some accomplished musicians in the family, correct?
he Milo is in his first year at the music school at Vanderbilt for clarinet performance. So yeah, he did not get that from me, but he is our most musical one, yes. But they all play. My husband played piano and saxophone in high school, so it's all his genes. But yeah,
I'll never forget a photo because for a while we had the same toy hauler. And like one of the reasons you had a toy hauler, correct me if I'm wrong, is like the kids like brought their instruments along and like practiced. Like I remember a photo of one of your children
yeah.
like playing an instrument in the back of the toy hauler.
We had a full size keyboard that we brought with us in the toy hauler. I think we will not be bringing it this summer, but we'll have a French horn with us and Milo's clarinet. So yeah, we'll still have a pretty full band in there.
Awesome. All right, so today you're taking us to North Dakota and you're taking us to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And the context here is you're going to give us a review of the Medora Campground. We'll mention some of the other options for anyone who's planning a trip to Theodore Roosevelt. And then you're going to take us into the park and give us, talk about some of the things you did and some of the, the key highlights that you're going to want to do if you go to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And obviously, we're carrying on our national parks theme on the podcast this season. We're not doing every episode on national park content, but we're doing a lot of episodes on national park content to celebrate the release of Where Should We Camp Next National Parks. So, Gretchen, not everybody gets to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, even really well traveled people. So, can you just give us sort of an overview of Theodore Roosevelt and Medora and the area?
Sure. So it's sort of on the very much on the western side of North Dakota, kind of in the middle of the state. It's right on what it does have going for it as far as accessibility is it's right on, literally right on Interstate 94. So I think a lot of people hit it if they're road tripping to Glacier. I mean, it's almost 600 miles from Glacier, but if you're coming from the East Coast and going out there, you're going to go right by it. So I think that's the context that a lot of people hit it on. Um, but it kind of seems like a smaller, cozier park. It doesn't seem as grand as some of the ones farther west. And then it's right north of South Dakota, and South Dakota in the Black Hills area just has so much going on that I think it does get passed over in favor of some kind of bigger hits of the national park world a lot of times.
Unjustly passed over? I mean, should this be rising up on our bucket lists? Is that what we're in for today? You telling us that everybody get thee to Theodore Roosevelt National Park?
I think so. I was a little worried because we did do this on our way back from Glacier, because we were passing right by it, and I was a little nervous that it would just pale in comparison, and it would be a little bit of a letdown. It's not like Glacier. It doesn't have the grandeur and the majesty, but we found it just really charming, both the park and the town. We had really good wildlife viewing there, like better than Glacier, and Glacier is, overwhelming and kind of hard to plan, and Theodore Roosevelt is easy. So it was kind of actually a nice contrast to that. Um, I don't know. I mean, the tricky thing is it is hard to get to if you're not if it doesn't happen to be on your route. So I don't know that I would advise people to, fly in and go there for a week because it's just not that kind of park. But if you can make an effort to get there as part of a bigger road trip, or if you happen to be fairly close by and can do, a long weekend or something, which would seem to be the other people who were in the area. There did seem to be a lot of people from the region who would come for their summer vacation. Then it's definitely worth seeing.
You're making me think that out of all the people that go to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, probably a disproportionate number are RV owners or people who are road tripping, who are going somewhere else and hitting it on the way, because it doesn't seem to be that type of destination where people are flying into wherever you fly into and saying, "Let's do our week's vacation at Theodore Roosevelt National Park." Um, yeah, but I think that's a great tip. If you can make it part of a trip to somewhere like Glacier or somehow tie it into your Yellowstone trip. I'm not great at geography, of course, but you could do it that way, go across North Dakota. It seems really, really well worth doing. One of my best friends in Montana has spent 10 years telling me that you will see better wildlife at Theodore Roosevelt National Park and at Badlands National Park than you will at Yellowstone and at Glacier. And I sort when for years I was like, all right, whatever. But then when we did our big trip to Badlands and then to Yellowstone, there were two separate trips actually. We saw way more wildlife in the Badlands. So I think that if you're into wildlife, there's another reason to go to Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, for sure. We saw tons of bison. We saw, I'm going to forget some things, but pronghorn,
Mm.
wild horses, like a huge herd of wild horses. Although you definitely want to bring binoculars because some of these things were farther away. The bison, of course, don't care that you're there and they're right up in your face, but hopefully not literally in your face. Keep your distance from the bison, everyone. But we saw pronghorn, prairie dogs. There's several places where they have prairie dog towns right by the road and you can stop and see the prairie dogs. So yeah, just lots and lots of wildlife.
Pronghorn are, like, so beautiful too. Now this was
Yeah.
part of you guys do, like, an epic RV trip every summer. I mean, frankly,
Yeah,
you
we
guys
try to.
inspire me. I mean, you really do sort of a, month-long kind of RV trip, which I love. So what was that whole loop, though, for you, where you were in
That
Theodore Roosevelt and then Glacier? Like, what other places were you hitting?
we called this one, it was almost 2 months, I think, last summer, and we called it Mountains, Mountains, and More Mountains. So we headed out west and did Santa Fe for a week and then up into Durango, and then a lot of Montana. We did not just Glacier, but several other towns in Montana, and then out to Theodore Roosevelt, and then we headed back and saw a few things on the way home. But those were the big things.
Alright, awesome. At the end of the show, I'll ask you what you've got planned for this summer. Let's stay focused now. So where did you guys choose to stay for Theodore Roosevelt National Park? Give us an overview of the campground, and also, like, why did you choose this campground? There are some other options.
Yeah. So we stayed at Medora Campground, which I'm not it's I guess it's sort of run by the city of Medora. But I'm a little confused. All of the tourist attractions are run by some kind of Medora foundation. And I'm not sure if there's really any separation between that and the actual city of Medora. So unclear if it's technically a public or private campground, but at any rate, it's run by this Medora Foundation that also does a lot of the tourist attractions in town. and it
I
is
think it's like
right in
it's a
town.
nonprofit, I think, that
I
is
think
just
so. I mean,
trying to
the town of
develop
Medora, I think,
tourism.
only has yeah, I think it only has like 100 full-time residents, so I think, you know, there's not that much difference between the city of Medora and these tourist attractions that go along with the park. So, so yeah, we picked it mostly because it was just right in town. You could literally walk to the visitor center of the national park or into the small downtown area to restaurants and all of that. So since this was a pretty short stay, we were there 3 nights. That proximity to everything was kind of what we were prioritizing. There's quite a few campgrounds in the area because, like you said, I think this is a very RV friendly destination, and there are a lot of RVers there. There are campgrounds in the national park in both the north and south unit, but of course, you're not going to get hookups in those. And they do fill up. They say that it fills up. The one in the south unit fills up by afternoon every day of the summer. There's a state park that's only about 3 miles away, and we didn't drive by and look at it, but from the pictures on the internet, it looks like it has big sites and is really beautiful. And that one does have hookups. So if you're looking to spread out a little more, then you might want to be farther out of town. It's just, what your priority is. Um, because the main complaint you'll hear about Medora Campground is that the sites are very tight, and it's true, they are. You're just right next to your neighbor. But they fill those sites up. So they actually added a few more site or a bunch more sites a couple of years ago because I think every weekend in the season they are completely full. So they don't want people spread out. They want to fit more people in there because there's the demand for it. So again, it's just we were fine. We weren't hanging out outside the camper. We were off seeing the park and everything. So it wasn't a big deal for us. But if that's going to bother you, then that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and inside the park, it's Cottonwood Campground and Juniper Campground, which is go to nps.gov and take a look if you're okay with dry camping. I mean, obviously, you guys want hookups, right? I mean, so but when you're doing these trips, you always tend to find the private park outside the campground, right?
We actually considered staying in the park. Juniper, I think, is the one at the north unit, and it's a good distance from the south unit. So we considered doing one night there, and I'm very glad we didn't in retrospect because it was very hot one of the times that we were there, one of the days that we were there, and we would not have done well with air conditioning. It was well into the 90s. So that's don't think just because it's far north, you're not going to get that hot weather in summer because they definitely do have heat waves.
And then it's Sully Creek State Park, which, just like you
Yeah.
said, some of the sites have hookups. So between those 3 places in Medora where you stayed, I'm not saying that's all of the options, but that's probably certainly 4 of the more popular options. So
Mm.
take us in more detail into Medora Campground in terms of, like, what was good, any other shortcomings besides the smaller sites, which is great info. Was it a pretty campground? Was it a parking lot? Tell us a bit more.
Sure. So yeah, no, it's very pretty. You've got views in several different directions of those North Dakota Badlands. Which, if you're familiar with the South Dakota Badlands, it's a very similar landscape. Although my son said, yeah, it was just like the Badlands in South Dakota, except green. So there is that. It's a little more lush landscape, but you've got views of that from the campground. So that was really pretty. They say on the website that there is access to the Little Missouri River, where I guess you can do. I'm not sure what you can do there. I don't know if it's big enough for like kayaking or anything, maybe fishing. We didn't find that access, but apparently it is there, and the Little Missouri River does run right through there, so that makes sense. Um, there are some nice public areas. There's a picnic pavilion, a playground, basketball court. There's a nice camp store, laundry room. The bathhouses were not our favorite. I think my main issue with them is they were really far. We were in that newer area, and there are two bathhouses, but they were both back in the older section. So it was a really long kind of hike. I mean, again, everybody has full hookups, but we had 5 people in our trailer with one bathroom, so we do use the bathhouse even though we have the hookups. Um, so the bathhouses were fine other than that, but they were not super well placed, I guess was my main issue with those.
In your notes, you say there's 224 sites there, so 2 bathhouses does seem like not enough, just doing a basic math equation there.
Yeah, I don't remember having issues like being able to like get in there, get a shower and all of that. So I think the bathhouses themselves were pretty big. There were a lot of the showers were like a separate room, like you went in, locked the door, and you had your own shower, which I always like. So I guess there must have been enough of them because I don't remember ever having a wait or anything.
Now, there's views, but you did say the sites are small. So does the campground overall have a vibe of being pretty, or does it feel more just functional, I guess, just getting people in and out?
Yeah, I mean, again, the public areas are really nicely done, so there is some room to kind of hang out. But yeah, I mean, the sites themselves, it's very just sort of red dirt everywhere, which is another thing people will complain about the dust there. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's dry. It's a dry part of the country. There's not that much they can do about it. But so yeah, there's not like any real landscaping between the sites or anything. They're very basic, plenty long pull throughs, but pretty basic. There are some parts of the campground that are more with the back ends for smaller campers that are more up against the trees and some of the older parts of the campground. And especially if you have a smaller camper, you might be able to get some separation and some trees and shade and all of that.
Like knocking a star off someone's review for there being dust seems somewhat unfair, if you're going to North Dakota, and like the
Right.
number of people that go beach camping and complain about getting sand in their RVs, right? I mean, um, so any other amenities there worth mentioning? You don't have like little kids, but is there anything else there in terms of a pool, a playground, any of that stuff?
They do have a playground. There's not a pool in the campground. The city pool is right there next, adjacent to the campground, and you can use that. I think there's a small day use fee. I think that I saw, and of course, again, town is right there. You can walk there or bike there easily. And I think I saw that they have a new like pool with maybe like a lazy river. Maybe new this year. I meant to look into it more, but I think, but again, there's lots of entertainment in town. There's putt putt, there's mini golf, there's all that kind of thing, and it's right there.
Yeah, I mean, that is cool option for the pool, like, if you're spending a morning in the park and then it's hot in the summer, it's nice that you take your kids swimming next door. How much did it cost? And I'm sorry if you said it already, but that you had full hookups, right?
We had full hookups. I think almost all of the sites are full hookups, and the range I looked for the 2023 season, it seems to be from around $40 a night for some of the smaller sites that, limited to 20 feet or whatever, and then up to 60 or 70 for the bigger pull throughs.
Reasonably priced, right? I'm from New Jersey. When I hear those prices, that automatically to me seems budget friendly. Of course, you're in North Dakota, it's quite far away. In a general sense, we talk so much about the overcrowding in our parks, and you're going to take us into Theodore Roosevelt in the next segment. Just in terms of the campground and the town of Medora and the whole experience, did it feel like it was less crowded than a lot of the types of national parks you've been to? Is it under the radar in
Yeah,
that sense that it's easy to park, easy to get in and out, easy to park at trailheads and all that stuff?
yeah, for sure. Definitely inside the park and then in the town. Again, I mean, we were there high season. We were there in July. I don't think we were there. I think we were midweek. No, yeah, because we got there on a Sunday. So maybe on the weekends, things get more crowded because I do think you get people coming in for long weekends who live in the region. But no, I mean there were people there. It didn't feel desolate. It didn't feel like we had the park to ourselves. But there was never anywhere where we had trouble parking or anything like that, or felt like we were shoulder to shoulder with people on the trails. It definitely felt like there was room to spread out.
Okay, awesome. Any other specific details about the Medora Campground you want to mention before we take a quick break and then go into Theodore Roosevelt National Park and then talk more about, some things to do in Medora because there are some really unique attractions in town while you're there. But anything else on the campground?
Nope. I think we've covered most of it.
Okay, so let's get ready to head into Theodore Roosevelt National Park. We're here with Gretchen from Boxy Colonial on the Road. But before we dive into that next segment with some tips for visiting the park and some cool things to do in Medora, we have a sponsored message from our friends at Yogi Bear's Jellystone Park Camp Resorts. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are here with Gretchen from Boxy Colonial and Boxy Colonial on the Road, and we're talking about the Medora Campground, which she just reviewed for us. And now we're going to go into Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and Gretchen's going to tell us, the highlights, what her family did, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll also talk about the town of Medora a little bit and some of the really kind of wacky things you can do there. So, Gretchen, take us into the park. My first question, though, you made the comparison to Badlands National Park. Um, in Badlands National Park, you feel like you're in another planet or on another planet. Does this have that feeling of like I'm on a totally different planet that is not the planet Earth, or is it not that as strange and as unusual as Badlands National Park?
No, I would say it's, I mean, pretty similar. Again, you have a little more greenery there, and I mean that might have just been the time of. I mean, who knows? Maybe we just hit the Badlands at a different time of year. But yeah, I mean, it's very similar, and it's the same kind of vibe where you can kind of just go off the trail and climb on things and get, um, up close and personal with the buttes. But it's, I mean, it's the same, the same kind of processes of erosion formed the landscape. I guess the difference between mountains and buttes is that buttes, like everything started out the same level and then erosion carved out things so that, whereas mountains, go up from, I'm not very good at talking about geology, um, they're not mountains, they're buttes, and that they don't care so much about you climbing all over them because they're eroding so fast, relatively speaking, that there's nothing you can do to them that erosion isn't going to do anyway. So,
Right when you
so
said
that's
you
kind
weren't
of a
good
cool
at
aspect
talking
of
about
that and
geology,
Badlands.
right when you were saying you weren't good at talking about this, I was literally thinking, "Oh, she's doing a really good job talking about this." I think that was perfectly fine
Oh,
description. Yeah, and in Badlands National Park, it's the same thing. Like, there's no signs like "Don't climb here." I mean, people literally
right,
just kind of, for lack of a better term, backcountry hike everywhere. People just kind of take off, and you got to be really careful doing that. Actually, I'm not really advi
right,
I
yeah.
would actually say stay on the trails at Badlands. That's my advice. But people kind of just take off there. All right, so what do we want to do? Give us a breakdown of the park, and what do we want to do while we're there?
Okay, so there's 3 units of the park. Um, and by far the most popular one is the south unit because that's the one that's right on the interstate. And that's where the city of Medora is. So that's where we were staying. So we had 2 full days in the park, and our first full day we went to the south unit. So the main thing to do there, is there's a scenic drive. It used to be a loop drive, but part of it is closed, I guess, long term because of erosion. So what you do now is you drive 24 miles in, and then you turn around and drive those same 24 miles back out. And along the way, there's a lot of, should they call them trails, but some of them it would be very generous to even call them trails. Most of them are very short. There are some longer hikes you can do, but for the most part, you're kind of stopping and then walking, zero point 0.2 miles or whatever to an overlook or something like that, and then coming back. And that's mostly what we focused on because again, it was very, very hot that day too. So we were not minding that we weren't doing longer hikes. One of the first things we did on that scenic drive is stopped to see some prairie dogs. That's very close to the beginning. And again, you can just stand right on the side of the road and they're just right there. Going in and out of their little holes. And then we stopped at, some other ones we liked. Skyline Vista is one of the first ones you'll come to. It's a trail that's zero point 0.1 miles long. And it's kind of, you get this really beautiful overlook of, the Badlands, but you also see the interstate down there. So that's kind of interesting. Not something you get in every national park, but you do kind of turn away from the interstate, and not all of the views are of I-94. The Boycott Overlook was another one we enjoyed. I think that is where we saw the wild horses off in the distance. So again, binoculars, definitely what you want. And then probably our favorite little hike that we did was Wind Canyon. That one's almost half a mile, and it makes a loop and gives you an overlook of the Little Missouri River. So that was really pretty.
I
Um,
love that you keep saying, like, to bring binoculars because that was so clutch for us in Glacier, Yellowstone, and Badlands that we had 4 pairs, I think, and leave them in your truck, right? I mean, like, have them in
right.
your vehicle, and if you like, I think one day we did bring 1 pair into Glacier, and the other were left at the RV, and, like, everyone was, like, grabbing them from each other. That's a good thing to invest some money and get some decent binoculars. So I'm sorry,
Yeah,
continue now with your.
for sure. That was, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, again, it's a lot of the same thing. You're driving and you're stopping and doing these little trails, and doing the overlooks. And that was sort of the difference. I'll talk about the North Unit in a minute, but it was more the South Unit. It was more of these overlooks, looking out over these grand vistas, And then the North unit was more kind of up close and personal and looking at things from below. But then also in the South unit, you have the visitor center. There's a very small visitor center in the North unit, but there's not much going on. But the one in the South unit is the main visitor center. It has a really nice gift shop, a short movie about that focuses the movie and the museum focus on Theodore Roosevelt's time in the park and in this area. And I think they do a really good job of integrating that. I kind of thought before we went, I sort of thought, well, it's just they just wanted an excuse to name a national park after Theodore Roosevelt, but he really did have a pretty deep connection to this area and spent a lot of time here, did ranching here. After his first wife died, he came here kind of to mourn. And they have, so they talk about that in the museum, and they have right outside that visitor center the cabin that he stayed in during some of his time in North Dakota. And we listened to a ranger talk about the cabin and about his history in the park, and you can go inside the cabin, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a really sort of a key, famous moment or period in his life. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe his mother died on the same day that his
His
wife
mother
died.
died on the same day. Yeah, you'll hear that story. It's a very, very sad story, but yeah, we I think we heard it about 3 times because, it did spur him to go back to North Dakota, so and you can't go very far without hearing someone quote him as saying, something like, "I never would have been president if it hadn't been for my time in North Dakota." They're very proud of that connection there. And again, I think they do a good job of not letting it sort of overtake the natural beauty of the area, but sort of integrating it and his relationship to the area into the park in a way that works really well.
North Dakota has this cool tourism campaign where they say visit us last. Like they encourage people to make that for people that are trying to go to all 50 states. They're saying,
Right.
"Come to us last," and then you get, like, a T-shirt, a sticker, a photo op. They have some cool program, and I guess, like, they figure a lot of people kinda do get there last that are going to trying to go to all the states, and so they're making a thing of it, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so, I mean, the presidential history with Theodore Roosevelt is substantial, right? I mean, like you said, it's not like they're just doing this, to kinda draw people in. I mean, he had real history here in this part of the country, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Anything else on the North Unit? I mean, you started talking about the North Unit. Anything else there?
Yeah, we were going back and forth about whether to go to the North Unit because it is thing to know about it. It's I think about 70 miles from the South Unit. So it's a hike to get there, and it's not a very nice drive. It's oil fields on both sides of you, and there's just nothing there. Um, and the day that we went, in contrast to our, mid 90s day that was miserable in that way, it was very cold and rainy and really, really windy. So this is another reason I was glad we didn't decide to bring the trailer up there because I mean it was like steady 30-mile-an-hour winds all day, and I wouldn't have felt safe driving the trailer. I wasn't thrilled about driving our van up there, but we did it and we made it. But everyone we talked to said, "Oh, you have to go up to the North Unit. It's just totally different." And we were very glad we did because, again, I think it was a more intimate experience. And they have some really cool formations that you can't see in the South Unit, like cannonball concretions, which are these things that look like cannonballs but are made out of the rock. And there was a lot more of that opportunity to kind of climb on some things. And yes, be very careful with kids because there are places you could get into trouble. But it was cool to see, and we had some of our best wildlife viewing there. A lot of bison. It's less crowded, but again, nowhere was super crowded. But it's definitely worth making that drive if you have the time.
If I'm remembering correctly, are the cannonball formations also by the NPS campground, or am I inventing that in my mind?
That's certainly
I think
possible.
they might be. I
I
mean,
didn't see the campground, so
and that, I
I
mean,
don't have it in
that's
my head where it is, but
that's definitely one of the highlights of this unit. I think, right? That's one of the more
yeah, yeah,
photographed
and they
and talked
there's
about
something where they don't
locations.
really know how they formed, which is, interesting.
All right. So anything else on the North Unit or the South Unit? I mean, so you just did a day there, right? Like that was it's a
We
it's a day trip that's what you'd recommend.
For the North Unit,
Mm,
or we did a day in each unit.
okay.
We were there 2 full days. So we did South Unit and then we did North Unit and then fit in stuff in town kinda, in the evenings. The Caprock Coulee Trail is one that I would recommend in the North Unit, and that's a little bit longer. It's not a 0.2 mile trail. It's 1.6 miles out and back, and you can make a longer loop, but we did the shorter loop. And they have a like a what do you call it? A brochure that you can pick up at the beginning that'll tell you about the different formations as you see them and as you pass them. So that was a nice little trail.
So, not strenuous hiking. I mean, I'm sure you could get into some strenuous hiking, but, a lot of accessible stuff, park the car, get out, look around. Maybe for somebody that's challenged with mobility or something, this might be a cool place because you can get a lot of these
Yeah, yeah.
views and overlooks without going deep into the hiking.
Right. I think you can get into more serious hiking. I think there's some really long trails that go through the park and then, miles past it. But yeah, it's definitely good for people with younger kids or people with mobility issues. There's a lot you can see without doing strenuous hikes.
Did you feel like 2 full days were enough? Like, when it comes to Badlands National Park, we always tell people, like, 2 to 3 full days is plenty. You don't need to stay longer. 1 full day is not enough. Did the 2 full days
Mhm.
work for you? Do you feel like you should have stayed longer?
Um, Not really. I mean, one more day. If we had had another day, we probably would have done more in town because there are some little touristy things there that would have been fun that we didn't get to. But for seeing the park, if that's your main thing that you want to see, I think a day for the North Unit, a day for the South Unit um, is plenty. Oh, I didn't mention the third unit. I mentioned there was a third unit, but didn't talk about it. It's the Elkhorn Ranch unit, which is the actual land that Theodore Roosevelt um, lived on and ranched. We did not go there because it's hard to get to. It's like miles down a dirt road, and they say sometimes depending on the weather, the conditions, and when it's rained, you might need a 4-wheel drive vehicle to get there, which we do not have. But if you wanted to go there, you would need another day, or if you wanted to do more hardcore hiking. But for us, yeah, we felt like 2 days was good. Another day wouldn't have been bad. More than that, we would have felt like we were kind of staying longer than we needed to.
And the crown of the continent was awaiting you, right? I mean, it's like when you're going
Well, actually, this
to
was
Glacier.
after
Oh, that was right.
Glacier,
I'm sorry.
but
It was after
yeah,
Glacier. Okay, so listen, we're gonna come back in a second, and Gretchen's gonna take us into the town of Madera. Did I say that right? Madera?
Medora.
Medora. And she's gonna tell us about some of the cool, quirky things to do there. But before we do that, we have a sponsored message from our friends at Go RVing. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are here with Gretchen Holcomb from Boxy Colonial and Boxy Colonial on the Road. Take us into town. What do we want to do in Madera?
Medora.
Medora.
Okay,
During the
so
break there, I mispronounced it 5 times.
the first half of the show, you were saying it right the whole time. So,
Oh, that's
um,
but everything's declining, Gretchen. That's
yeah.
that's how it works.
So the big thing, the big spectacle in town is the Medora musical. I had been looking forward to this for months, mostly because I just wanted to find out what it was all about. Because again, it's this tiny little town with maybe 100 full-time residents, and how are they doing this giant musical that looks spectacular? So we found out. We went there our first night. We actually got there. We rushed there so that we could go on the Sunday night because kids are free on Sunday and I think Wednesday nights. And it's kids up to 17, which was nice because we had our 16-year-old and our 9-year-old. Um, so one thing to know is it is an expensive evening. The tickets are priced like it's a full musical, and so it's like $50 to $70 for the adult tickets, I think. Um, but I would say if you have not done it, it's worth it. You need to see the Medora musical if you are in this area. It's very professional, very elaborate. They bring in people, I think they're probably college kids who are doing musical theater programs or whatever, from all over the country. I think there was one person who was there from Mexico. So I think that it's a big known thing to come and do a summer in Medora and do this musical. So I wrote down, they describe it as an ode to patriotism, Theodore Roosevelt, and the great American West. And it's it's hard to describe, but it's big musical numbers and dancing, and it tells the story of Medora and of Theodore Roosevelt's time in Medora with a very healthy dose of patriotism. There are horses doing amazing things. It doesn't take itself super seriously, which we appreciated. It's fairly campy, but then I've also seen people. I've watched like people see this on in their YouTube videos and like tear up about the sort of patriotic aspects of it. So I think there's something for everyone, for the cynical and the less cynical. But
And
yeah,
whi
we really
which are
enjoyed it.
you? And which are you, by the way?
Well, at the beginning I was the cynical, but they won me over by the end when the horses with the flag started going. No, I mean it's Theodore Roosevelt's a pretty non-controversial historical figure, so they have a good thing to work with there to kind of bring everyone together. But
I mean,
yeah, and we all enjoyed it. It was
the key thing you're saying here is you're like, "You should go." I mean, you're recommending this. Like, I see that you're like I mean, I totally get it because this is what the rodeo was like in Cody, Wyoming. I mean, it is a patriotic spectacle, and I'm a patriotic guy. I mean, I love our country, but it's just like it's a lot, you know? That's what the Cody rodeo is like, and this also strikes me as being, like, really sort of, grand and overboard, and that's part of the point, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And they have a section in the middle where they kind of make fun of themselves, like the history of the musical, how they had this guy had this idea to do a musical in this. I don't remember how many seats there are, but there are a lot of seats in this town with 100 people. What a great idea, and they make fun of themselves for that. And yet they draw in these people. I mean, it wasn't full on the Sunday night that we were there, but there were a lot of people there. So people come and see it. It worked. This grand vision of this giant musical in this tiny town.
I'm smiling the whole time because 'cause I'm picturing, like, the founding mothers and the founding fathers being like, "Well, we need to get tourism up here," and then somebody had the light bulb, "A musical. Let's do a musical." I mean, look, you can get people to anywhere in America if you have a national park and a musical, okay? That's
Right,
all
there's
you
you
need,
need
basically.
nothing else, that's right.
Anything else, to do in town or anything else you guys did? I know you were in and out quickly. Any other things you can't miss, or is it really just the musical that you can't miss?
Well, the musical you definitely don't wanna miss. I should mention there is right next to the musical, we ate before the musical at the Pitchfork Fondue restaurant, which is this open air restaurant that's exactly what it sounds like. They put a whole bunch of steaks on a pitchfork and dip them in boiling oil and then serve them to you, and that one I would say, if you're gonna miss either the Pitchfork Fondue or the musical, you can skip the Pitchfork Fondue. It was fun to do once, but for one thing, everybody gets a well done steak because that's just how they cook them. So it's not like this great steak, and it's more about the experience. Also, not good for vegetarians at all. My then 16-year-old's a vegetarian, and they're like, "Oh, you could just get the sides," but the sides were like corn and then
Like
beans
chicken
that had
wings.
pork in them.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So yeah, so that one is skippable, but it's if you want to go, it's a fun experience. They have live music there. The other big thing we did in town was we saw a Theodore Roosevelt. They don't call him an impersonator; they call him a repriser. And it is a guy. His name is, I think, Joe Wigand, and he's very impressive. He becomes Theodore Roosevelt, and they have a little theater in town where you go in, and he basically just tells you stories as if he's Theodore Roosevelt. But before he gets to his stories, he goes through the audience and like asks everyone where they're from, and then for every state someone's from, he'll have a story at the ready in his head about what Theodore Roosevelt did in that state. So that was an impressive experience. And we were surprised. Even my 9-year-old stayed enchanted the whole time and did not get bored, even though it was, again, sort of long, rambling stories that Theodore Roosevelt was telling him. So
I
that
guess
was
there was
pretty good.
he did so much conservation in so many states, like, that could probably be the story for a whole bunch of them, wow. Now is this I mean, is this a can't miss thing, even if you're among the cynical?
The I we enjoyed it. If you have, I actually we kind of rushed back from the North Unit to see this because I, for some reason, was really excited to see it. Um, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say if you're a kind of a history buff, then it's definitely a great experience for you. If you're not, then I don't know. It depends on your tolerance or love of long, rambling stories told by someone impersonating a former president. I guess I enjoyed it, and all of us enjoyed it. That's all I can say.
I have 2 more questions for you, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. So, like, we did I just keep coming back to Badlands, like, I feel like my family, like, we did Badlands. We did all the hikes. We went to Wall Drug, like, I don't and I loved it. I'll recommend Badlands to anybody. I loved Badlands National Park. I don't feel any need to go back. Where
Mhm.
I wanna go back to Glacier badly. I wanna go back to Yellowstone gladly. I wanna go back to Acadia. I wanna go back to so many places. And this is not a knock on Badlands. I just feel like it was a one-time thing, and my time on this planet's limited. Do you feel any desire, like any need to do a return trip to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, or does it fall into that category of a place you can go to once in your life and really feel like you experience the essence of it?
Yeah, I would say that. Although I'd probably go back to Badlands before Theodore as well. We really, really love the Badlands. But yeah, if I were passing through again in the same context, I would try to make like a day to stop over. I wouldn't want to rush through and not see it if I were there, but I don't feel like I'm gonna plan a trip around it. I mean, which we kind of did for this. Like we could have gotten home sooner or whatever, we didn't have to stop here and we made an effort to. I think that I would make an effort to stop again if it were on the way, if that makes sense. Like I don't feel like I would just be like, "Oh, whatever, I don't need to see this again." I would enjoy seeing it again, but I wouldn't go out of my way the same way I would for Glacier or for Yellowstone or for whatever.
That I would say the same thing about all points in South Dakota. Like, if I'm driving out there, I'm making time to revisit things I loved, but I'm not gonna make another trip that's specifically to South Dakota. So, thank
Right.
you so much. That was really terrific. I mean, if anybody's, planning the trip to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, I'm sure this will help you. If anyone is going there this summer, please, send me an email, let me know. I'm sure this podcast will be helpful. So, Gretchen, what is your big family RV trip this summer? Because there's been an epic trip just about every summer.
Yes, this is one we've been trying to plan for years and for assorted reasons hasn't happened, but we are planning to go to Newfoundland, Canada this summer. We should be there about 5 weeks and we're very, very excited about it.
Are you gonna do a lot of time in Nova Scotia along the way? Or are you really kind of
No.
dedicating your time to getting out there to
Yeah,
Newfoundland?
it's a long haul,
Mhm.
followed by a 7-hour ferry ride, and we did Nova Scotia. We spent about 3 weeks in Nova Scotia a few years ago, so this one will be sort of just racing through to get to the ferry. Actually, my son is doing a music program in Lunenburg in Nova Scotia for 2 weeks, like, and then is going to meet us in Newfoundland, so he'll be spending a lot of time in Nova
Oh,
Scotia,
that's
but we're,
awesome. What
going
are the
to
chances
sadly
of
have to
that?
just rush through. Yeah.
Well, I really do hope, that you come on the podcast and we do some kind of episode on that trip. That sounds awesome. So thank you so much for
Yeah, I
coming
would
back
love
on the
to.
RV Atlas. Definitely. Thank you, Gretchen. And where can everybody follow you? If because you do a great job of taking awesome photos on these trips as well. So where can everybody follow you on social media and your websites?
Yeah, wha now I'm blanking out. Oh, I'm on Instagram, Boxy Colonial on the road, and that's also the blog, boxycolonialontheroad.com, um, and on Facebook, but I don't post much on Facebook. So yeah, mostly Instagram and the blog.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you at the campground, Gretchen. Thanks. Have a great day. Say hello to the whole crew.
Okay, thank you. I will.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the RV Atlas.
To find out more about the topics discussed on this show, head on over to thervatlas.com.
And to join the friendliest group of RVers, head on over to the RV Atlas group on Facebook and make sure to join us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at the RV Atlas.
If you enjoy our show, please consider leaving us a review over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
And we will see you at the campground.
See you at the campground.